Alrighty, welcome everyone to the capstone panel of the inaugural ALS Community Summit. This is the peak of the summit, I guess, the Youth and ALS panel, where we will talk about how ALS can impact youth and also how youth may impact ALS. My name is Paul Carey. I have been an advocate for ALS for the last 20 years. My mom, Lori, was diagnosed in 2004. Hi, Lori. uh, my mom and I and our family have been coming to DC for different advocacy conferences, seminars for different organizations for the last 20 years. And this summit has been maybe our favorite experience. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to ALS. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the patients and caregivers who have shown up this week in person and virtually. There have been a lot of tears, laughs, smiles, friendship, and a lot of love this week. And that's what Finding a Cure looks like. So I'm so happy to be part of it. So happy to be moderating this panel. We're going to do some quick introductions and then have some presentations from our panelists and go into a Q&A. So if you've been waiting all week to ask a question, this is your last chance. So online or in person, we'll invite you to ask questions in the second half of the session. So let's start with some quick introductions. Just say your name, where you're from, and what your connection to ALS is. Sarah, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you. My name is Sarah Trott. I'm an executive board member with nonprofit Hope Loves Company, and my connection to ALS is through my father. He had ALS for 6 years, and I was a youth caregiver for him.
Thanks.
My name is Lakeia Nard. I am the founder of Melanin Children Matter and also a member of I Am ALS Many Shades. My connection to ALS is my son who passed away last year on Rare Disease Day. And I'm from Owensboro, Kentucky.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Terry. I'm from Leeds, Alabama, which is just outside of Birmingham, the home of Charles Barkley. I'm the founder of Stomping Out ALS One Step at a Time, which is my nonprofit that I created in honor of my grandfather who had ALS for 22 years. I'm really honored to be here today and so happy to see all of your beautiful faces.
Great. And we have two virtual panelists. So Gretchen, if you could introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Duffy. I'm from Telford, Pennsylvania, so just outside of Philadelphia. And my connection to ALS is vis-a-vis my mother, who battled the disease for just under a year and passed away in 2019. During her illness, I was her primary caregiver, and I took on that role with my 3 very young kiddos in tow.
And Mindy.
And my name is Mindy Uhrlaub. Thanks for having me. I'm zooming in from the San Francisco Bay Area, and my connection to ALS, actually I have many connections to ALS because I'm a genetic carrier of the C9orf72 gene that causes ALS and FTD. I lost my grandfather, my mother, and I have an anonymous family member who's another carrier. And then I also have 2 children who are at risk of developing ALS or FTD because they might be carriers of the C9 mutation as well.
Okay, those are our panelists. Thank you for the introductions. We're going to start with Sarah Trott, if you want to tell us your story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you again to ALS for hosting this summit. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit about my experience as a young caregiver. I was 19 years old when my dad started developing symptoms. Like many people, you go through the laundry list of what could this be? What do these symptoms mean? And about a year later, we found out it was ALS. I was in college at the time, and it was just incredibly devastating to receive that terminal diagnosis for him and for our family. And today I'm talking a little bit about the youth caregiving crisis. I was 19 years old and in my early 20s supported him with a lot of hands-on care and caregiving, supporting my mom and my sister as well. But today I would also like to talk about youth caregivers who are under the age of 18 who support their loved ones with hands-on caregiving tasks. And as an executive board member of Hope Loves Company, I've seen this firsthand. of incredible young kids who have parents with ALS and their resilience and strength. Let's see if this goes. Oh, next slide. Oh, here we go. All right, I'll get the hang of it. Today's discussions, we'll talk about who are children caregivers, challenges in recognizing youth caregivers, some of the risks they face, key strategy areas and interventions and outcomes, and specifically talking about the work that nonprofit Hope Loves Company does. So who are children caregivers? These are children under the age of 18, and they really work behind closed doors. There is an estimated 5.4 million youth caregivers under the age of 18 in the US. Those ones have unpaid caregiving responsibilities for family members or loved ones, providing care in home settings for those suffering from disability, chronic or terminal illnesses, injury, or other long-term illnesses such as ALS. So these young caregivers carry out on a regular basis very significant tasks, assuming the level of responsibility which usually would be associated with an adult. So think of helping with a feeding tube, Hoyer lift transfer, bathing, trimming nails. You know, a lot of those tasks, I've seen kids as young as 6, 7 years old that have come to the Hope Loves Company camps and retreats, sharing about those experiences, being a young one, doing these tasks that are really the level of something that an adult would do. Health disparities and the health crisis and COVID have really exacerbated this issue. So the national gap in healthcare disparities, access to quality and affordable care, married with the COVID-19 pandemic, have really compounded this issue, leading in more single parent and single grandparent households, and therefore increasing the number of youth caregivers. So the added responsibilities and stress of a young person navigating just being a young adult, getting through elementary school, middle school, there's hardships and mental health struggles, you know, with that, in addition to that of youth caregiving, really compounds these difficulties, impacting their mental health, leading to increased anxiety, depression, and suicidality. A study funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually found that 22% of young adults who dropped out of school did so to care for a family member, highlighting the significant impact of caregiving responsibilities on educational attainment. In 2021, the US Surgeon General issued a report declaring kids' declining mental health is the crisis of our lifetime. That report illustrates that youth are reporting more feelings of isolation, stress, and inadequacy, and these findings are even greater in youth who are caregivers. Recognizing youth caregivers, it's really just understanding, you know, who are youth caregivers and their contributions. That is really a big challenge for teachers, educators, doctors, neighbors, loved ones to recognize and understand that the work kids are doing as youth caregivers are valuable contributions and can really impact their mental health and educational attainment. Additionally, some challenges and threats. The public health systems, educational institutions, and government policy has been incredibly slow to recognize the contributions and psychosocial setbacks that young caregivers face. There's a very small yet emerging research base and public interest in this matter. So that number I shared before, 5.4 million youth caregivers in the US, I believe is a gross underestimation of how many caregivers, young caregivers, there really are in the US. And presently at scale, there really are little to no supportive programs that offer consistent, meaningful, accessible, and cost-free, most importantly, services and interventions to diverse at-risk youth. And again, just touching on this, gradually surfacing research, terminology, and identification, even the term of youth caregiver or saying caregiver, many people imagine someone that shows up in blue scrubs to help your loved one that maybe has a certificate or a credential. But those caregivers and youth caregivers are really just, you know, children that are doing something out of love to care for a parent. Some of the risks faced by young caregivers, you know, mental health issues, isolation, depression, extreme stigma, anxiety, even self-harm. More than 1 in 3 high school students said they had experienced such persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness in the past year that they couldn't participate in regular activities. a 40% increase since 2009. So I think that's looking at a wide variety of different factors that's causing the crisis of mental health in our youth. And again, youth caregiving really compounding those difficulties for young people. Seeing this firsthand, a lot of kids pulling themselves, withdrawing from activities or friends, and really isolating themselves because having a parent in a wheelchair, maybe using a walker, may be embarrassing to a young person who can't really articulate ALS to their friends or family at school, can be very difficult. Discrimination, poor academic performance, as we know, being pulled from school to go to doctor's appointments or maybe to help out at home, chronic absenteeism, tardiness, and that all affects educational attainment. Vulnerable populations are further marginalized. Youth caregiver populations of precarious status, including LGBTQ+, Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and immigrant groups also pose an increased risk to this issue. Additionally, escalating costs in mental health care has been an incredible barrier of just accessing support for youth caregivers. Some of the key strategy areas, I believe change in order to make progress on this issue has to happen in both domestic and professional and educational settings. This entire summit is rooted in hope and the future of ALS. And I believe just talking about youth caregiving and being aware of some of the struggles is really the first step in a brighter future. So recognizing and identifying, acknowledging these issues in a professional, educational, and domestic settings. Teachers maybe being more aware that if a child with a parent with ALS is late to school or absent frequently, that they may be facing some unique challenges. Expanding access to mental health care so professionals can have the resources to recognize, handle, and gain insights from these challenging experiences. And then most importantly, educating youth and adults about youth mental health and providing access to art and music therapy, creating peer connection and opportunities for young caregivers to have healthy social relationships. And some of that can be seen through the work that Hope Loves Company is doing with team building, confidence, stress management, and just promoting overall healthy habits and lifestyles. So I want to take a moment to just chat a little bit about Hope Loves Company. This is an incredible nonprofit founded by Jody O'Donnell Ames 10 plus years ago. It started with just family fun days and has evolved into incredible weekend-long, cost-free family camp retreats where kids can come together ages 6 through 25 and have the opportunity to be surrounded by a group of peers who just get ALS. No one has to explain it. You can just be and have that peer community and support for children and their parents. There's educational webinars. Hope Loves Company recently has also offered cost-free mental health services, as well as mental health support, age-appropriate programming for different youth. And most importantly, the signature program being the family camp retreats. We just hosted our virtual camp and also a New Jersey camp. Later this year, we'll be having family camps in Arizona and California, and I encourage families to attend. A little bit more about some of the programs that we have. I would love to speak with you or anyone that may be interested that have young ones at home to just share more about the Hugs of Hope packages, parent meetups, support for parents and adults, and just different partnerships that are really impactful for youth caregivers. We've seen incredible outcomes through these programs, just increasing access to mental health, reduced feelings of isolation, depression, and anxiety, cultivation of a safe space, and truly a continuum of care as kids grow up and age out throughout their ALS journeys, move on to young adulthood, but are really paired with an incredible toolbox of resources and a peer community. HLC has made a significant impact last year in 2023 and throughout a decade of helping children and families. Here are some photos. Being a camp counselor at one of these camps is such an incredible experience. So if anyone's interested in volunteering as well, please chat with me. We would love to have you. And one question I want to leave all of you with is, what does the future of youth caregiving look like? something that we can really think on and maybe discuss together of, what can we do to make sure kids, pals, caregivers, and their loved ones are all supported through this journey. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. I think you very well articulated the problem statement, and it's really cool to see what HLC is doing to address that. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lakeia, would you like to share your story?
Y'all ready? So I'm gonna start off with what I've written so far before I go off topic. King Nasir was 3 years old when he was diagnosed with the actual mutation was called SPTLC2, which under the pediatric ALS umbrella. After being flown out to the NIH after seeing 27 doctors and having missed 3 diagnoses, he was officially diagnosed with the SPTLC2 childhood ALS. When there are changes, mistakes in the gene, that provides instructions for the SPTLC2. It can lead to a condition that where everything that he learned, he lost. I watched him deteriorate right before my eyes. At 18 months, he finally learned to walk, and he walked with the gait. By 2, he had a hard time getting back up after falling, which he would laugh about. He would, as he slowly, progressively began to lose the very functions that he had learned. By 3, he was using a gait trainer and a walker. By 4, he was in a wheelchair full time. By 5, he could no longer lift a boiled egg, and I use that because he used to play with it all the time. I used to have to go buy eggs and boil them so he can play with them. Needed a feeding tube to keep healthy weight. He was 6 years old and weighing 27 pounds. He caught the rhinovirus and lost what we thought was a battle he was winning after not being hospitalized for 2 years and throughout COVID. At the age of 6, King Nasir needed a tracheostomy. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make, and that was to sign a DNR and bring him home on hospice. By 6.5, he ended up brain damaged and was on a machine shortly after. His 7th birthday on rare disease, he passed away. King Nasir loved water, outside, and nature and animals, and was a kid who always had a smile on his face and enjoyed classical music during bath time. Although nonverbal, because he was autistic, he never stopped him from communicating or learning his numbers, letters, nursery rhymes, all in Spanish and in Portuguese. And I tried to change it because I thought he was stumbling on it by accident, and he went right back to it. So I think he knew exactly what he wanted to learn. He was autistically awesome child that was taken too soon by this ugly disease, childhood ALS, and no boundaries, no matter the age, race, or gender. This horrific disease will take everything from you and those around you. In that process of being diagnosed and researching everything that the doctors had told me, I'm texting my neurologist at 2, 3 in the morning, like, hey, you remember you said that? Well, it's not. And she would call me in, and she was so patient with me. And we eventually got to the bottom of it. She sent his records overseas trying to figure out what was actually wrong with him, because everything that she came up with, he was the complete opposite. They had told me he, after going to the NIH, they was like, just to, go home and enjoy him. There was no resources given to me. There was nothing. So I went home with nothing. And even when I did find out it was ALS, I went to the support groups in ALS, and they were like, no, not no kids, surely not Black kids, and you're a scammer and you're a liar. And the neurologist forum, it had got to my neurologist to where she had called me and she was like, "You're making news, girl." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're a scammer." And she just started laughing. She said, "But I had to let them know that King Nasir was a patient of mine and that you were not scamming people, that this is really happening." He was the first boy, second child diagnosed with this specific mutation. And there are other mutations that children are having that are falling underneath childhood ALS that awareness is not being brought to. In this journey of loneliness, family and friends alienated me. All I had was my children, my older children, and a wonderful man who came into my life who is now my husband, that was patient and so supportive of me in this. So I started a foundation called Melanin Children Matter to honor my son and keep his legacy alive so that he did not die in vain. And in this, I realized that there is a huge gap in research when it comes to children of color. And let me back up. When I named it Melanin, because I had a woman who was upset and said I needed to change it to Black Kids Matter. But I named it Melanin because we all know it's responsible for what changes our, the hair color and our eye color and the tones of our skin. So melanin was a wide range to say that all children matter, even the ones of color. And in that, I learned that there was a huge gap in research and there was no resources giving to underserved populations. And I felt so lonely on this journey. I never wanted another family to ever go through that. So I started the foundation and I ended up getting awarded a grant to help keep and build the foundation through CZI, so I'm definitely grateful. And I want to thank I Am ALS because I've reached out to ALS associations everywhere. And of course, I was dismissed, and I Am ALS was one who took me in, I would say. They took me in and they were so supportive and so understanding, and I didn't feel alienated with them. So I thank you all for having me here to share my son's story and my organization. And I want people to understand that it's not just an older white man's disease. His mutation was spontaneous. So that means that it can happen to anyone, no matter your race, no matter your age, any of that. So I do want to take the time to say that outrage that you have for adults, I need that same outrage behind me for children. And again, thank you so much. And I'm going to cut it short. I love you guys.
Thank you, Lakeia. Emma, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Could you pass me the clicker, please?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Just 1 second. I do. But if you can't get it pulled up, that's okay. While Holly gets that pulled up. Oh, no, you're fine. Technical difficulties, everyone. Thank you for being patient. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Terry, and I'm the founder of Stomping Out ALS One Step at a Time. And first of all, I want to say that I am so thankful to be here and so thankful for this experience to meet all of you, and incredibly thankful for I Am ALS. You guys took me in and provided me with opportunities to volunteer and advocate, and all of the staff here at I Am ALS, Michael, Deb, Sonia, everyone. You guys have invested so much time and energy into this cause and into this community, and it means the world, especially from someone who has experienced this on such a personal level. I grew up helping take care of my grandfather, who I called Grandy, and for my entire life, I watched ALS take him from me piece by piece. So that's my why. That's why I advocate. That's why I'm here. And that's why I created this initiative called Stomping Out ALS One Step at a Time. And let's see if I can have the magic touch with this clicker. I do. Okay. But
My ALS connection is my grandfather, Stuart Simpson. And like I said, I grew up helping take care of him. So I fall into that young caregiver demographic, like Sarah was talking about earlier. So I really identified with a lot of those statistics and a lot of those experiences you were sharing, because I think I could tie my grandfather's shoes before I could tie my own. I was helping put his socks and his shoes on. I was putting the toothpaste on his toothbrush in the mornings and at nights, and helping set out his medicine as a teenager, and watching this disease progress and growing up. I say that I learned independence at the same time I was learning dependence. So while I was growing up and becoming more and more independent, I was watching my grandfather, somebody who I loved so, so much, lose his ability slowly. I never heard his voice. I never saw him walk independently. And we never had those typical granddaughter, grandfather experiences. I know he would have taught me how to work on cars. I know he would have let me push mow the lawn. I've always wanted to learn how to push mow, but we never had those typical experiences because of ALS. We had a connection and we were able to communicate because he could write on a whiteboard and he could type in his iPad. But I still saw this disease ravage his body, and it's an experience I'll always remember because it was really prevalent during my formative years. And up next, okay, there it is. I would like to talk about a campaign that I share on my social media pages, and it's called Realities of ALS. So these are the experiences like tying the shoes or changing diapers or cleaning out equipment or dealing with a feeding tube crisis. And I like to share those because they're really real, raw, visceral experiences of this disease that aren't always talked about. And growing up as someone who was a young caregiver, I didn't know this community of people, this beautiful community existed until I was 14. I didn't realize the resources that I Am ALS gives or the ALS Association provides. And finding this community was really a lifesaver, because as a young girl and as a little girl, I wanted to help more. I wanted to do more for my Grandy. And then when I realized there was a larger community of people that were affected by this disease, I wanted to do more. So that's why I created Stomping Out ALS One Step at a Time. And that's also why I share realities of ALS, because it's important to let people know that they're not alone in this disease. And about a month ago, my family and I experienced the ultimate reality of ALS. We lost my grandfather to ALS, and I don't like to say he lost his battle, because he fought for so long. He fought for 22 years and broke this 5-year prognosis and proved doctors wrong, and worked hard his entire life and left behind a really strong, powerful legacy. So he did not lose his battle to ALS. His battle may have ended, but he left behind this really strong, impactful, powerful legacy. And now through Stomping Out ALS, I'm really honored that I get to continue his memory, because I used to do work in his honor, and now that has morphed into continuing his memory. But the biggest lesson, oops, you get a little preview. Oh, hold on, I don't have the magic touch anymore. There it is. The biggest lesson that I learned from my grandfather is to build a higher road. What does that mean? It means to leave the world better than you found it. It means to welcome exhaustion, welcome late nights and early mornings, to create this dream, not just for yourself, but for others. One of my dreams is to eradicate this disease. And I believe that through this community and through really powerful messaging that we have, that we can build a higher road for this community. We will be able to stomp out ALS. And a little bit more about what Stomping Out ALS means is we can all take small steps to stomp out ALS. No action is too small for this movement. No action is too small to contribute to this movement. And I don't have millions of dollars, certainly don't have that. I don't have endless connections in the legislature or even within this community. I'm still growing my network, and it's been an amazing experience to grow that network this week. And I don't have the capacity to host these extravagant fundraising events, but I can do something. And that's the idea that I try to share with Stomping Out ALS one step at a time, that we all can do something. You can educate yourself. You can educate others. You can participate in community events. You can do something, and you can have an impact on this disease and on this movement to defeat ALS. And I miss my grandfather so much that it hurts. But this advocacy and continuing this work and this organization has helped me so much in the wake of his loss, and to take a heartbroken into, I'm sorry, y'all, I didn't mean to do this.
You're doing great.
Thank you. And take a heartbroken into a million little pieces and put it back together. So now I gotta get it back together. But thank you all so much for being here. And thank you so much for being part of the movement to defeat this disease, because we're doing it for my grandfather. We're doing it for the people in this room who have this disease, and we're doing it for the future and to build a higher road for this community and create change. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go to Gretchen. Gretchen?
Hello. Should I wait for slides to pop up?
Yes.
Okay. Nope, go back one. Oh, other direction. I mean, we can stare at my kids if you want, but that's not the beginning. Ugh, wrong direction. Did I send it to you backwards? Good grief.
We're figuring it out.
That's okay. That's okay. Hooray. Perfect. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I am here representing the perspective of a young mom who served as primary caregiver for my mother. Well, perfect. Thank you. While also parenting 3 very young children under the same roof. Of course, ALS made us feel wildly unprepared for most of what it threw at our family, but supporting my kids was actually the area that we felt best equipped to handle. My mother was a practicing pediatrician for 35 years, and I am a certified child life specialist, which means that I studied child development and am trained in the developmental impact of illness, injury, and hospitalization. And so I work in a children's hospital supporting kids so they can better understand and cope with healthcare related information, including challenging news related to their grown-ups. I also do a little bit of work with Hope Loves Company, facilitating some of their virtual support groups for teens who have ALS in their lives. So I will share a bit about our story, and then I'll talk about some of the approaches that we took to support the kids through this experience. And then finally articulate some support gaps that I think are continued areas of opportunity for us as a community. Next slide, please. So this is my beautiful mother. She was diagnosed formally in September 2018 after about a year of symptoms. She had a very, very fast progression and passed away about 1 year later. At the time of her diagnosis, my mother lived alone. So while I was living my own crazy life, juggling 2 little kids and a pregnancy and a career, that's a primary reason why I came to steer our ALS ship, so to speak. Within a few months of her diagnosis, we had purchased and renovated a home together to support her care. And so my kids really were front and center for most of her illness. I also want to note that my mother elected very few interventions throughout her illness, which I shared just to add some context for the conversations that we had with our own kids. So speaking of, next slide. These are my 3 babies who were the absolute lights of her life and who brought her so much joy during this otherwise horrific time. My mother played a very large role in their lives. And so supporting the kids through this news and her progression was really a top priority for us as a family. Next slide. So there are a lot of resources available that address how to talk to kids about difficult news across different ages and stages of development. But I thought I'd summarize how we approached that, again, kind of informed by our professional backgrounds as well. So first and foremost, we were committed to being very honest, open, and forthcoming with information that was catered to where our kids were developmentally, including making sure to name ALS, because if the kids are going to overhear grown-ups use the word, they're much less likely to have misconceptions if you identify those terms up front. Especially for our kindergartner, our early conversations also included addressing the 3 common questions that young kids often have when they're faced with difficult medical news, which are, did I cause it? Can I catch it? And who will take care of me? Or how will my relationship with that person change? We were also very sensitive to allowing the kids to kind of self-dose how much information they wanted at one time. So we made sure to address what was happening in the present, but not overwhelm them with information, with the understanding that any question was fair game, and we would promise to answer it as honestly as we could, which sometimes, a lot of times, meant saying we don't really know or we're not really sure yet. And we maintained that honesty even once my daughter especially started kind of connecting dots about my mother's prognosis. The other aspect of supporting our kids that we were very committed to was both normalizing and including them in the day-to-day caring of my mom. So they helped with little tasks throughout our daily routines as they evolved, but still preserving the kids' routines and their ability to participate in their lives and activities. So yes, while we moved, we did so very locally. My kindergartner even stayed in the same school. And we found ways to maintain their schedules and their ability to still do normal kid stuff like swim lessons and soccer practice and park dates with friends. We were able to do that by leveraging a very, very strong network of family support. I did not do that all by myself. And it was certainly a challenge to disavow myself of the notion that I am Superwoman, because I am not. But in my experience working with kids affected by ALS, the ones that I've seen cope the most positively have been those whose families have preserved reliable time and space for them to seek their own interests or relaxation time or play or what have you. And they really commit to and carve out that time. And I think that segues really nicely to my final consideration of areas for opportunity. Next slide. So again, our family and those others that I've worked with who've been able to kind of strike this balance were able to achieve that because we had the help and resources to do so. And I think that for those operating in this space of providing services and support to children with ALS in their lives, it's really, really important to think about upstream support for parents and caregivers to make it possible for kids to access those services. So in other words, it's kind of a hierarchy of needs type conversation. I could have every intention of keeping my kids in activities to preserve that normal childhood experience, but if I didn't have somebody to help me with my mom so I could get away, I wouldn't have been able to realize those intentions. So I think when it comes to things that kids need adult help with, logistics like respite care, transportation, or finances to participate in something supportive, I think that there needs to be a parallel consideration about logistics to the conversation of the support itself. It was also our experience, and continues to be mine as I work in this space, that there are not a lot of programmatic resources for parents of young kids, so under age 5 or 6. And so those opportunities might look more like structured support for adults caring for those little ones, or perhaps more developmentally appropriate print resources geared towards younger age groups. I recall asking multiple organizations throughout our journey about more ALS specific children's books or other resources for my very, very young kids. Just kind of doing my due diligence in the role of mom and not child life specialist. And no one was able to produce any. And that included some very major ALS organizations. I lived just outside of Philadelphia. Most of the existing resources at the time were geared towards older school age kids and above, so just not really appropriate for where my kids were developmentally. So I do feel like it's an important part of the conversation, and we as a family definitely perceived a gap in support from our care team for parents of very, very young children. Next slide, please. So as a final thought, and kind of circling back to our own experience, I in no way want to paint the picture that we absolutely nailed every minute of guiding our children through this, and that it wasn't really, really, really messy sometimes. When I was looking for photos for this presentation, I came across this one of my middle guy, our 3-year-old. This was taken about 3 weeks before my mom died. He is sitting on our pantry floor, watching a tablet and eating a full-size chocolate bar that he had helped himself to. For context, it was August, and I think those were Halloween candy baskets, so judge me if you will. He is surrounded by boxes and clutter and I don't know what. And so we absolutely had our moments of anything goes and felt like we were in survival mode a whole lot. And I think it's okay to be angry that our kids are being exposed to some really, really hard truths about life, that sometimes really awful things happen and we don't always know why, and it doesn't seem fair. And that is all very valid and very true. But I think we always framed our decision to kind of take on this caregiving role in front of our kids as an opportunity to teach them about resilience and showing up for family, and how to cope with tough stuff. And that opportunity and that mission for our family is ongoing. The conversation absolutely did not end when my mother died. The kids' grief and their understanding of ALS has developed with them. So almost 5 years later, my daughter is now 11 and frighteningly smart. And she just recently, out of nowhere, asked me about whether there was a genetic component to ALS, out of nowhere. So our journey continues as our kids grow. And I can only hope that I will make my mother proud by continuing to guide them through this chapter in our family's story. So thank you so much for having me. I very much look forward to our continued discussion.
Thank you, Gretchen. Mindy?
Hi, and thanks again for having me. I guess I should probably, this is a great place for me to jump off, Gretchen. I remember being on panels with you before, and it's really helpful talking about kids of different ages. At the time when my mom was going through her ALS journey, she was about midway through ALS in 2018, and my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. He had a large diffuse B-cell lymphoma. And at the time, my older son, who then was 14, was really struggling in school. He had behavioral problems. He had emotional dysregulation. He was experimenting with drugs at a very young age. And we had to put him in a therapeutic boarding school. So basically, I had 3 first-order relatives who were in life-threatening situations: my mom, my husband, and my son. As Gretchen alluded to, life intercedes. Sometimes there's a lot to balance. So we always had access to a child psychiatrist, and we definitely used that child psychiatrist when it came to advising us how to talk about these different diseases with our children. And given the circumstances of just the overwhelm that was going on in the family, we decided, because we had a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old at the time, they were already watching their dad battle cancer and go through chemotherapy. So we decided, with the help of the psychiatrist, to not tell the kids until anything became medically necessary for me. I didn't want to out myself as a genetic carrier. Like, I had known for years that I was carrying this gene, and I knew that it could affect my kids, but I knew at the time it was not a good time for me to talk to them. And so basically, if you kind of rewind back to 2018, I mean, as my mom's ALS progressed, I was kind of like going back and forth on an airplane from California to Florida, which is where she lived. And, my kids were getting reports of how she was doing, and they got to see her also. But, she suffered with ALS for about 5 years. And she had like early symptoms in 2016. And when she passed away in 2020, she had already gone through like the whole spectrum of symptoms that we've all seen in ALS. And it was 2020. And, I knew I wanted to participate in research, but I couldn't because now it was COVID, right? So we just kind of kept things very quiet. My husband went through chemotherapy. Thank God he lived. He's still alive today. He's cancer free. My mom, unfortunately, passed away. And, once a COVID vaccine came on the horizon, it was obvious that I could get the vaccine and participate in medical research. So once I was vaccinated in 2021, it became medically necessary for me to actually go do something vis-a-vis my own ALS. And at the time, my kids were 17 and 15. My older son had returned from residential treatment, and he's well also. I should mention he's in college and he's living on his own. And when I delivered the news to the kids, it was over dinner. And I said, I'm going to Boston. I'm going to participate in medical research around ALS. And of course, the kids sort of perked up because they were like, you're doing what? Because it was obviously just something that sort of, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it was something that had calmed down, because all they knew about was their nanny, my mom, who had died of it. And so I said, I'm going to go to Boston. I'm participating in medical research. It's related to ALS in the family. And they asked why. And I said, well, there's a genetic component in Nani's ALS. And at that point, they could have gone online and like Googled stuff because they were 17 and 15. But I just decided to tell them, what they needed to know without having to go too far into the woods or into the weeds about like the minutia of percentages of people who get ALS and all this other stuff. Like, I just told them very clearly that, ALS was genetic in the family. I was a carrier, and that I did not have ALS, nor do I have ALS, and that just because you carry the gene for ALS doesn't mean you're going to develop ALS, which is also true. They asked about, if they had asked about my chances or what percentage of people who have the gene, develop ALS, I would have been honest and I would have told them, like, Gretchen, it's not good to lie to your kids, but it's also not good to overshare. They asked, could I pass the gene on to them? And what were the odds that they would have the gene? And I told them, honestly, each child had a 50-50 chance of carrying the gene. And I reiterated that that did not mean that they would get ALS. Remember that, kids at that age are very self-centered. They're not necessarily worried about me. They're more worried about themselves. And so that's age appropriate. And so I kind of answered self-centered kind of questions, like told them that ALS, generally speaking, is an adult disease. Generally speaking, the genetic forms are adult diseases, but that the gene that I carried typically did not have an onset until ages 40 to 60. And that even at their ages, they couldn't be tested for the gene. Like here in California, they don't even test kids for C9 until they turn 18. So I told them that, because I was going to give spinal fluid, I was going to give blood, I was going to give other genetic materials, that we would get us all closer to a cure for ALS. And that I didn't ever plan to get ALS. And my hand to God, I still don't plan to get ALS. I never lied. I never told them too much. That there's like a 97% chance that I'm going to develop ALS was not pertinent in that conversation. If they ever ask, I'll tell them. But now there's new research saying that there's a 25% chance. So like, I don't know, if they were to ask what my chances are, I guess I'd go, because that's really the truth. And I didn't tell them anything that was going to be too hard for them to handle on the heels of their dad's cancer, on the heels of their nanny dying, on the heels of my son's residential treatment facility experience. I just didn't want to overwhelm them. But because I demystified the part about research, one of my sons actually enrolled in ALS research. And, that's kind of amazing. Like, he was not afraid of enrolling in genetic testing later because I demystified, all this other stuff before. My other son, the one who went to residential treatment, runs anxious and he doesn't want to be tested, and that's his business, and that's fine. I told them that really the only way that they should enroll in research in the first place is, one, if they're about to have kids, two, if they're going to join the military and potentially expose themselves to traumatic brain injury, or three, if they were going to become activists. And as it happened, one of them did become an activist. What's kind of interesting is, when I told them, they actually thanked me for going to Boston and for finding out my genetic status. So I think that they knew that I was watching out for their health. And I think that if my kids at that age are thanking me, then I probably talk to them about it the right way. And, I guess I can't say what's good for other people who are talking to their families about ALS, but I can tell you that this worked for me and for my kids and continues to be an evolving conversation. I think everyone here has said it already, but if you are a genetic carrier of ALS, and especially if you have kids, you should create a support system around your ALS experience that consists of therapists, friends, family, and nonprofits like I Am ALS. Also, I started with some friends a new organization called End the Legacy, which is for genetic carriers. That's a wonderful resource for people who are in genetic ALS families. I would recommend that you connect with the I Am ALS community support group and the peer mentoring program, which is fantastic. And most importantly, that if you're going to talk about ALS with kids, that you create a sample script beforehand so that you can be aware of any questions that they might throw your way that you might not otherwise be ready for. Also, I should mention right now that my friend Lori and Paul and the whole Carey family has I'm Dying to Tell You, and which is a wonderful podcast. So I thought I would just give a shout out to that. And of course, I guess I should just ask about Paul's group as well, but I guess I can do that in the question and answer. Either way, there are so many resources out there, and I hope that you'll contact me or contact I Am ALS if you have questions. And thank you.
Thanks, Mindy, and thanks for the plug. I'm only being paid moderator money, though, not the panelist. So anyway, thank you. That is a great segue for a Q&A. So if anyone does have a question in the audience, feel free to raise your hand. If you have a question online, feel free to post in the chat, and we can start. Do we have a microphone for questions? Super. We have one right here in front.
Thanks everyone for your time. My question is regarding familial ALS. For context, we found out recently my dad carries a dominant gene for familial ALS. I'm the youngest of four sisters, and each of us have a much different perspective on it. As soon as I found out, I wanted to enroll in clinical trial studies, and I am enrolled but have waited to start because I'm just waiting for my life insurance to be finalized, which is a very weird thing to do at 27. But obviously there is nothing protecting against discrimination for that. Nonetheless, my question is, how can I spread awareness about familial ALS while still respecting the privacy of my siblings?
I'm in a similar situation that you are. I'm the only family member, actually, I and one other family member are the only two people who have had genetic tests for ALS. I don't know if you're a carrier or not, but I think that privacy is really important to certain people. For me, I wear mine on my sleeve. I'm very out. I have motor neuron tattoos on my body and stuff. So it's like everybody knows if they follow me on Instagram, like what I do and how out I am about this. But really, in terms of spreading awareness, I have to plug and the legacy. We're all genetic carriers. And we actually have a summit that's coming up next week in Chicago. I also think that supporting organizations like ALS TDI, they have lots of research going on in the familial ALS space. And, I feel like the best way to really be involved, as you know, is through longitudinal research. Depending on what gene you carry, there aren't that many actual clinical trials. I'm enrolled in 16 longitudinal studies right now. I'm in one trial right now. And if you want, I can put my email in the chat and you can reach out to me and we can continue a conversation.
Thank you. I do have one more question, if that's okay. What can we do to support Melanin Children Matter?
So what you can do to support my cause is share. People don't realize how even free stuff can be so motivating for other people. Culturally, when you think about people of color, there's a disassociation with the healthcare field. There's a lack of representation in the medical field. So a lot of us do not feel safe. So by sharing my content, following my content can show that, one, shows my grant that my organization is growing so I can get more funding. Two, it can have someone contact me because I've already been contacted several times by people. So that's why I kind of expanded it to rare disease, but my focus is childhood ALS. But it's such a gap for cultural reasons to where I'm the only really one out here. So it only felt right to expand because I'm having people with other diseases contacting me, asking me like, what do I do? What resources are out there? And I cannot deny them just because they don't have ALS. So just sharing and following and my content.
Lakeia, can I ask a follow-up? What type of content have you felt is most engaging or I don't know, maybe most emotionally compelling in sharing your story with folks who don't understand maybe like the inequities that you've experienced?
So the most engaging content is when I do discuss my experience in the medical field. I get a lot of feedback from that because we are not taken serious when we say something is wrong. We are not taken serious when we tell a doctor that maybe you're just not right. And that's a lot of experience that culturally that we have. We can't just go in there and say that, they're going to find like, okay, like, yeah, because I was dismissed several times and I always had to go find something affirmative to show that says, I'm right in what I'm saying. And then when they get there, they're like, oh yeah. So my word is never good enough. So I get a lot of engagement with that. I get a lot of engagement with just me telling the story of my son and being African American with a child with rare disease. Most of us, we kind of just, suck it up, and we take the doctor's word for what they're saying, and we don't realize that they're practicing. That's why it's called practice. And they're human and they don't know it all. And you know your child best. And he Nasir, I took him everywhere. Like I treated him as if nothing was wrong with him. We were at parks. We were in Florida at the beach. Like I was going to make sure he had the most best life he could possibly have. So just people seeing me out with him was engaging. So.
We have another question.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. I really appreciate you sharing. This question is for Sarah. I'm really interested in what Hope Loves Company is doing specifically for the youth caregiving crisis. So are they incorporating different things into the camps? Or, how are they bringing that in and how are they tailoring that to young kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I wish I had more time to elaborate on Hope Loves Company. I know I kind of skimmed over that, but the organization, their signature program are weekend retreats that are cost-free for kids and their families to come if they're old enough, maybe a teenager. They're welcome to come alone. If they're younger, they can be accompanied by a pal or a guardian, a sibling. And they attend camp with all of the traditional activities that really bring in youth with rock climbing, archery, s'mores. But beyond that, there are small group meetups with licensed professionals, mental health specialists, to have group share hangouts where kids can talk about their ALS experiences. We do yoga, meditation, stress and anxiety exercises aimed to equip the children with tools that they can take home beyond the camp experience. So when they feel overwhelmed or stressed or sad, that they're aware of those feelings and that they have the skills to manage those feelings when they're at home. We also have virtual meetups. So beyond the camp and some of those age-appropriate conversations and group shares and hangouts that we have depending on the age group. We also will have virtual meetups. So those same mental health specialists hopping on Zoom calls and continuing those friendships that are built at camp and expanding upon those while they're at home during the weekday so that they have a safe space virtually to talk with their friends and professionals who can support them along their journey.
Right. I think it teaches them at a young age how important community is on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Thank you.
Sarah, do you have any maybe testimonials or examples of in which you found out that like this is really working, like this is really making a difference that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I could say, having been a camp counselor for a few years, watching some of these kids grow up through the program is really special. And at the California camp in particular, last year, it was just so incredible to see all of these kids come back together that have attended this camp for a few years in a row. They keep in contact through Snapchat and texting, and they live in all different parts of California. Some of them are flying out of state, and these reunions are, filled with tears and big hugs and so much joy. to be reunited with friends who just get it, because a lot of the kids that are their age, they can't talk about this with their sometimes even best friends at school. So just seeing these kids look forward to camp, and then watching kind of the wheels turn of these conversations that are so heartfelt through group shares that sometimes last hours for the teenagers, where one thing will happen and another person will talk and they'll build on that and snowball, and they're crying and they're hugging and there's joy and there's sadness all at the same time. But there's so many breakthrough moments where these kids are really connecting the dots in their own personal stories and with each other and relating and bonding. That is just so surreal to watch that unfold. And, those are the high schoolers, and, some of them, that's just something they look forward to despite all of the devastating effects of ALS.
Great, thank you. I'm so happy to hear that this exists.
Yeah,
Really am.
thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Yeah, yeah, feel free.
This question is regarding so I think as the adult child of someone caring for a parent with ALS, I think something not talked about is the idea of also caretaking for the other parent who is the primary caregiver or the spouse of the patient with ALS. And so in my case, my dad has ALS and my mom is his primary caregiver. And I just recently moved home to support not only him, but honestly, my mom. And so my question is, how in your journeys with ALS have you found, what have you found most supportive in looking out for your own mental health when you feel like you're constantly caring for not only the person with ALS, but also maybe the other parent or the person that's their primary caregiver?
I can start with this one. I can relate to that because my grandmother was my grandfather's primary caregiver. They were married for 63 years, y'all. She has never been alone and was so accustomed to taking care of him for the past 2 decades of her life that she really lost herself in the process because she was so wrapped up in the caregiving process and taking care of him, especially in those final stages of his disease. And then my mom and I, we're now staying with her. And I think someone asked me the other day, well, how have your caregiving duties changed? Or is that still part of your life? And it absolutely still is, because now we're helping take care of my grandmother and maintaining your own mental health. I think that comes in so many different forms because it's such a unique experience for every person. It might mean small breaks. Sometimes I like to go for a walk outside, just a quick 30 minutes or an hour, just to have some time to clear your head. Journaling helps. There are little things that you can do to maintain your self-care because, I'm sure as we all know, with our experience with ALS and caregiving, you can't always just take off a weekend to go to the spa or something like that, but you can do little things for yourself. And I think it's important to do little things for yourself, but with your mom specifically, like my grandmother, getting her out, allowing her to have those little experiences for herself, that's the biggest thing because she got so wrapped up in the caregiving process. She didn't want to leave him. And now we're working to help her find her identity beyond being a caregiver and beyond being tied to this disease so closely. So make sure that you help your mom and also make sure you help yourself maintain some sort of independence and a separation from your identity as a caregiver and as an individual.
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice. I think I would also add communication is so important. I think, someone else this summit said ALS turns a lot of people inward with the disease and the caregivers around them, but to really set healthy boundaries and communicate when you feel like you are spread thin or you feel like you really just need a break, to have that trust and communication to express like, hey, I just can't do this right now, or I need a break. Could you jump in? Something that my family did, we created a caregiving schedule. It was almost like a work schedule. But, we knew when each person would be on and which sibling, okay, it's your turn to help with the Hoyer lift or the bed transfer for nap. And that means that the other person can take a nap and that you kind of have some structure, because otherwise it could feel like chaos. And then again, to your point, just maintaining your identity. If it's a hobby that you love, if it's hiking, if it's, for my mom, it was a once a week, an hour dance class, or a language class that she did virtually so she could speak Spanish and, use that part of her brain that she doesn't normally get to use. Something that preserves your own identity, that makes you feel good and will just take your mind off of ALS in a healthy way, is really important.
Yeah, pretty much what both of them said. I know I wished at that time, which I got all the time now, so it doesn't matter, but at that time, which was 7 years, I wished could have gotten just a day. I didn't, everyone was like scared, I guess. I don't know. I didn't have no one. So for 7 years straight, it was a straight go. There was no break. Even when he was hospitalized, I never left his bedside. So just having that, just a day, and to feel safe to know someone has him fully the way that I would have him. So when I did step out of that house, I had a peace of mind to relax, to say, I know he's fine, and I can really be in the moment of that break. So just like she said, having that schedule is important to, give your mother a sense of break, or, a little spa day, or a bath with a glass of wine.
We have another question in front.
Mindy, this question is for you. It's Lori. Thank you for the shout out. But you mentioned that you knew years prior that you were a ALS gene carrier before you told your children. Can you talk a little bit about how you handle that emotionally? Just kind of, yeah. How do you do that?
Well, Lori, I'm not a fan of lying to my kids. I felt like it was a lie by omission, but I felt like I was giving them the gift of being children. And this idea of, like, we had gone through it with my husband. He had had symptoms of cancer for like 4 years before he ever got a cancer diagnosis. And this was his second major cancer diagnosis. And so, like, he had had this pain all the time, and he was getting biopsies, and he was like, God, I wish I could like enlist the support of my kids. And the psychiatrist was like, don't do it. Your kids need to not worry about you right now. They're, 6 and 8 or 8 and 10 or however old they were. So when it came time, like, I found out in 2018 when my mom was still alive, I found out that I was a carrier, and that this was when everything was kind of blowing up in my family. And that really weighed on me, because I got one kid who's like really, really empathetic, and I needed him, and I couldn't get that support from him, but I didn't want him to have to worry about yet another parent who was going to die. And so it was really hard. I mean, there were days where like, okay, well, I'll just say it. I was going through perimenopause at the time. I wasn't sleeping. So like I wouldn't sleep well, and then like I'd have to like put on my big girl pants and like do the day with like the sick husband and the sick mom and the sick kid, and then my own sick. But I just did it. I mean, as you know, as a parent, it's like there's absolutely nothing that you wouldn't do for your kids. And it was one of the hardest things I've had to do. But ultimately, I think that my kids have even said to me, like, I'm glad I didn't know, when I was younger, because it would have just ruined their childhood, and I think that it was a terrible, gut-wrenching kind of decision I had to make, and I did it with medical supervision, so that's what I knew. That's how I did it.
Yeah, and I think maybe I didn't ask the question correctly. I totally understand and respect the choice that you made not telling them. So I just want to be clear on that. I guess I was thinking of how incredibly hard that was for you to internalize that alone, and how you dealt with it. We're talking about self-care and self-love. How are you able to take care of yourself? And so that was what I was trying to get at. Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
because,
I'm-
I mean, as a mom, I get it. You'll do anything. And that
Right.
alone, is a drive to do it. But I guess what recommendation do you have to someone else that might be in your position that
Yeah.
you were in, and that they are
Okay.
dealing with that knowledge alone for all the right reasons, but still is a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely picking up what you're putting down here. So,
Okay.
what did I do? First of all, I had a psychologist of my own that I talked to. I went to a therapist once a week. Um, I, because I was up late at night and I was vacillating, mostly because of hormones, but also because of the obvious elephant in the room. I went on Lexapro, like I went on an anti-anxiety medication because I don't think I could have done it otherwise. I did a meal sign up when my husband was going through cancer so that people would come and bring us food. I'm not a great cook, but I'm even worse when I have to deal with like 3 people in my family who might be dying. Um, and I just have a lot of friends. And, I had been through cancer already once with my husband, and I knew that community was really like important. And I just kind of, I told a lot of people um, that my family needed help. Like there were times when I had to take my husband to the hospital and a neighbor would walk the dog for me. And there would be a time when I'd have to go for a genetic test of my own, and my husband was overnight in the hospital and my mom was sick, and I like would ask if my kid could sleep over at someone's house. Like I am not afraid to ask for help. And I think that I just have a fundamental like belief in humanity that people are just going to come through for me because I know that I've come through for them. And I guess I just am trusted. I trust in my community to care for me when I need them.
Thank you. So I have a question for Gretchen. I was very interested in the concept of self-dosing when it came to, kids coming to understand what ALS is. I would just like you to reflect on that a little bit and talk about the success or maybe struggles with that, and maybe, some kids self-dose at a different pace. And I'm also curious about, as kids get older, to what degree does the internet, play in that kind of self-dosing and, self-informing mindset?
Sure. So I think that I find a lot professionally that when there's really difficult news to deliver to a young child, that the adults in the room expect kids to respond the same way that adults would when you're sharing very weighty, meaty information. And so I'll get called in to support, and everyone's sitting around the room prepared to divulge this very sad news to a young child. And I often have to manage expectations with other adults in the room that for kids who are very, very, very young, um, it's very challenging cognitively for them to process more than little nuggets of information at a time. especially when they are challenging pieces of information that revolve around an illness or a poor prognosis or something of that nature. You'll often find when you try to deliver that information to really little kids, they might look at you blankly and then say, okay, can I finish coloring now? Or do you have snacks? They'll listen, and then they will very, very abruptly and very quickly sort of check out. Or you might find that kids will repeat the same question to you over and over and over again at that age. And it's not because they're not listening to you. It's because that repetition is how their brain learns information at that age. So we were always very upfront and honest with our young kids. Again, my oldest was only 5 at the time. So she was the one we were speaking to most frankly about what was happening. And again, we gave her small bits of present-based information. And I think by doing that, and this kind of segues into the follow-up question about older kids and access to information, et cetera. I think by being upfront with kids, you give yourself a little bit of a buffer to them sort of seeking out information behind your back, so for lack of a better phrase. So by you as the adult in their life being upfront and honest about what's happening in small doses of information that they can understand, you're setting the expectation that, okay, something is happening, but the adults in my life are going to be honest with me about it, and they are going to help me understand what's happening in a way that makes sense to me. But they're also not going to push me. So they're establishing a safe space so that when I do have questions, even if they're out of left field at weird times, they're going to answer them honestly for me. And I think that when you establish that trust for kids, they're much more likely to seek information from the adults in their lives rather than self-seeking. But I also think it's appropriate as kids get older to set that expectation that if there's things that they're curious about, you really would encourage them to come to you first, and maybe you can look for those things together instead of them doing it on their own. But that certainly is an issue that access to information and information literacy is something that kids are learning younger and younger and younger. So I do think it's something that makes sense to address head on as kids get older, for sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Lori, Carey, do you want to ask another question? Yeah.
Sure.
Well, so people online.
Okay, this question is for Emma. So I had the privilege of talking to Emma on the podcast. So I know her, and I know your love for your grandee. And I know it wasn't too long ago that you lost him. And I also know from my own experience, caregiving for my mom, who has passed. In my everyday life, I see things come up, and I'm like, I am my mom. I learned that from my mom. Or, like I feel her with me.
Yeah.
I was just curious because you had such a great love for him.
Yeah.
Like, what is something that you're doing today, this week, that you have seen him show up for you?
Oh gosh, I've been saying for the past month that I see him everywhere and in everything. And I decided a long time ago that he was going to be a bluebird, and that was going to be my sign. So at home, I've been seeing a lot of bluebirds and redbirds also. That's well known that, redbirds are a sign that it's a loved one. So I know that sounds so silly, but seeing those little signs has been really encouraging to me. And then I'm also visualizing him sitting in the front row, or visualizing him walking up Capitol Hill with me, and thinking about what he would have been doing had he not been sick, or what he would want me to do, has been really helpful. I mean, the day after We're calling it Stuart's departure, everyone. That's what the phrase is. But the day after Stuart's departure, I had been signed up to volunteer at the VA ALS clinic in Birmingham. And I'd been signed up for several months and thought, my grandy would not want me to get in the bed and crawl up in a little ball. I've got to keep going. And that has been really helpful to me throughout the past month and going forward. I know that he was a hard worker his entire life. And so knowing that and keeping that at the center of my advocacy and my life essentially has been really helpful, and it's made me feel really close to him. Thank you for that question, Miss Lori. That was great.
Emma, quick follow-up.
Go
I
ahead.
love the realities of ALS
Thank
that you
you.
shared. Are there one or two, I don't know, powerful or profound or memorable realities other than the passing of your grandy that really stick out?
There are lots of memories and realities of ALS that stick out in my mind. I know I mentioned feeding tube crises, plural people. We had a time with that feeding tube, but he was hospitalized on Easter Sunday. And I think that is one of the most recent, besides his loss, realities of ALS, because we just kind of had to drop everything and take him to the hospital because he was not doing okay. We heard the word sepsis yet again. He fought multiple rounds of sepsis and had an intestinal blockage, and that kind of kicked off the last couple of weeks of his life. And just having to drop everything and go to the hospital on Easter Sunday. We didn't have our typical family lunch that we normally would, but we made it work. And I think that's also a really big reality of ALS, is just making it work, rolling with the punches and keeping going, even though it might be hard. I mean, I took an exam from the hospital. I may or may not have waited till the last day that it was open to take that exam, but it was just something that you had to do and you had to get it done. And I think that's the most poignant reality of ALS that I can think of.
Well, that is a great note to end on. We are making it work. We are rolling with the punches together. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all the attendees and to IMALS for a great conference.